È un pacchetto particolarmente importante che vede modificare molte direttive europee, un pacchetto che va nella direzione di maggiori tutele per i consumatori. Io sono molto contento della presenza stasera tra noi della commissaria Jourova, che è presente a questo nostro incontro. La ringrazio non solo per questo, ma soprattutto perché ha voluto fare questo importante pacchetto legislativo da sottoporre alle due istituzioni che hanno il potere di approvarlo, il Parlamento e il Consiglio, per dare un maggiore potere ai consumatori europei, maggiori possibilità e maggiori tutele per i consumatori europei. Grazie davvero commissaria per essere qui, l'ascolteremo nell'intervento e soprattutto sono contento che accanto a me ci sia Evelyn Gebhardt, che è la nostra relatrice per il gruppo SD su questo pacchetto importante e sarà lei poi che dirigerà i lavori. Ringrazio anche tutti gli intervenuti, i relatori che parleranno dopo Evelyn e dopo la commissaria, che ci daranno un quadro molto importante su questo pacchetto. Io quindi darei immediatamente la parola a Evelyn Gebhardt, che è la relatrice del gruppo SD per questo pacchetto, e poi successivi gli altri interventi. Grazie.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, lieber Nicola. Vielen Dank auch an allen Anwesenden und Redner und Rednerinnen, die gekommen sind. Ich denke, wir reden heute über ein sehr, sehr wichtiges Thema, nämlich das, was für die Bürger und Bürgerinnen auch immer sichtbar und tastbar ist, weil wir gerade als Abgeordnete immer wieder mal gefragt werden, ja, aber was bringt mir persönlich denn dieses Europa? Und ich glaube, das ist der Bereich, in dem wir noch am ehesten sagen können, ja, ganz direkt bringen wir sehr viele, sehr positive Dinge. Und deswegen freue ich mich natürlich auch, nicht nur, dass mein Koordinator links neben mir sitzt, sondern auch Frau Jourova als Kommissarin, zuständige Kommissarin, sich die Zeit genommen hat, heute hierher zu kommen. Das ist eine sehr schöne Sache. Die Europäische Kommission hat am 11. April 2018 ein umfassendes Gesetzespaket zur Änderung einer Reihe verbraucherrechtsrelevanter Richtlinien vorgelegt. Der New Deal for Consumers, so der Titel der Initiative der Kommission, besteht aus 2 Richtlinienvorschlägen: der Verbandsklagerichtlinie, die auf Schadenskompensation gerichtete Klagen von Verbraucherverbänden ermöglichen soll, sowie einer sogenannten Omnibus-Richtlinie, deren S&D-Schattenberichterstatterin ich bin und mit der 4 bestehende Verbraucherschutzrichtlinien gezielt geändert werden sollen. Abgesehen von einer vorgeschlagenen Maßnahme unterstütze ich den Vorschlag uneingeschränkt. Bei einem Vorschlag habe ich da ein Bemol, sage ich einfach mal, aber das kommt noch. Kann mir allerdings in manchen Bereichen, insbesondere bei der Plattformhaftung, noch einen weitergehenden Verbraucherschutz vorstellen. Ganz besonders positiv in den Vordergrund zu stellen ist die vorgesehene Stärkung von Verbraucherrechten auf den digitalen Märkten. Verbraucher und Verbraucherinnen müssen künftig klar darüber informiert werden, ob sie Produkte oder Dienstleistungen von einem Unternehmer oder einer Privatperson erwerben. Denn da sind die Rechtsfolgen natürlich sehr unterschiedlich zu sehen. Nur so können Verbraucher bei Problemen die ihnen zustehenden Verbraucherrechte erkennen und wahrnehmen. Ich begrüße weiterhin, dass mit dem Richtlinienvorschlag eine größere Transparenz bei den Suchergebnissen auf Online-Plattformen erzielt werden soll, indem Verbraucher über die relevanten Kriterien der Suchalgorithmen für das Ermitteln der Rangfolge sowie darüber informiert werden müssen, wenn ein Suchergebnis von einem Unternehmen bezahlt wird. Allerdings bin ich der Ansicht, dass der Begriff des Online-Marktplatzes weiter gefasst sein sollte und insbesondere auch Vergleichsportale und App-Stores mit einbeziehen sollte. Entsprechende Änderungsvorschläge habe ich eingereicht. Ich unterstütze auch uneingeschränkt das Ziel der Richtlinie, Gegenleistungen in Form von Verwaltungsrechten an personenbezogenen Daten der monetären Gegenleistung gleichzusetzen. Um das Widerrufsrecht in diesem Bereich effektiv durchzusetzen, bedarf es einer Pflicht der Unternehmen, personenbezogenen Verbraucherdaten erst nach Ablauf von 14 Tagen an Dritte weiterleiten zu dürfen. Das bringt mich zu meinem Hauptkritikpunkt an dem Richtlinienvorschlag: die geplante Einschränkung des Widerrufsrechts. Die Kommission schlägt vor, in Artikel 16 der Verbraucherrechte-Richtlinie so zu ergänzen, dass das Widerrufsrecht künftig entfällt, wenn Verbraucher eine Ware über das zum Prüfen der Eigenschaften notwendige Maß hinaus benutzt hat. Ich darf berichten, dass nicht nur ich diese Änderung gestrichen habe, sondern mit mir alle anderen Schattenberichterstatter und der Berichterstatter von der EKR, Daniel Dalton, diese Streichung auch hervorheben wollen. Also Frau Kommissarin, Sie sollten sich wirklich überlegen, ob Sie bei dieser Änderung bleiben wollen. Das in der Verbraucherrechte-Richtlinie verankerte Widerrufsrecht im Onlinehandel wirkt vertrauensbildend und wird als das europäische Verbraucherrecht wahrgenommen. Mit der Verpflichtung zum Wertersatz besteht ein ausreichendes Mittel im Fall einer übermäßigen Nutzung von Waren vor dem Widerruf. Es ist ja nicht so, dass die Unternehmer alleine gelassen werden im Falle, dass eine zu starke Nutzung der Waren benutzt worden wäre. Ich bin gespannt auf das Meinungsbild und die Anregungen, die wir von unserer Diskussionsrunde heute mitbekommen werden, die ich dann gegebenenfalls auch in die erste Sitzung der Schattenberichterstatter mitnehmen werde. Diese Sitzung findet am nächsten Mittwoch statt. Also Sie sehen, das geht alles jetzt sehr schnell. Und ich habe auch gerade mit Frau Jourova kurz gesprochen. Wir sind uns noch nicht ganz im Klaren, kriegen wir es noch in dieser Legislaturperiode geschafft. Also wenn es nach der Kommission geht, ja. Wenn es nach mir als Schattenberichterstatterin der S&D-Fraktion geht, auch. Das Problem wird wieder mal der Rat sein, der etwas langsam ist, immer in seiner Entscheidungsfindung, aber wir werden versuchen, ein bisschen Druck zu machen. Aber bevor wir in eine Diskussion hineingehen, freue ich mich sehr, sehr, Frau Jourova, dass Sie uns die Zeit gegeben haben und auch hier noch einmal Ihren Ansatz hier darstellen wollen. Und deswegen gebe ich Ihnen gerne das Wort. Bitte schön, Frau Jourova, Sie dürfen loslegen.
Thank you very much, honourable members, Madam Gebhardt, Mr. Dante, ladies and gentlemen. The pleasure is mine. I am happy to be here and to have a chance to explain how the Commission, how I myself see now the prospect and the future of this file of this the double legislative proposal, the omnibus and the representative action. How I see it, I always see things positively unless it's becoming clear that it will not develop well. So we are not there yet. I must agree with Madame Gebhardt that we see very swift progress and very strong political will in the European Parliament, and I also wanted to come today to thank you for being the drivers of this proposal. Well, in the Council, we have more or less positive reactions. There are bad reactions to the right of withdrawal, which I'm sure you will be happy to hear that, because you are criticizing it as well. For the collective redress proposal, there are some doubts or some critics saying that we want to copy the American class action model. So wherever I go, I explain the work on collective redress started with a clear picture of what we do not want in Europe, and this is the American class action. So I will do my best to explain to many others coming from the member states with this criticism. The third conflicting point in this package is the dual quality of products, not only of food, of products. We have made some progress in the member states, or among the member states, because still, I think, a year ago, for the East, it was the subject to be upset about, that we are the second level consumers, and you know it was and still is very emotional. And in especially the Western countries, they didn't understand what's wrong, and they said it's some kind of pseudo problem which the Easterners just invented to have some criticism. I must say that this is not East-West problem. After our analysis and many testing we did, but it remains the matter which deserves solution, because this is a reality that we have dual quality of products. It's most visible on food, but also it concerns detergents. And just a personal reflection, I remember the time after the Iron Curtain fell down in 1989, I was living near the Austrian border on the Czech side, Czechoslovak side. And we went with my granny to do some shopping across the border to Austria. We had few shillings in our pocket, no money, you can imagine, we were very poor. And we bought a coffee and a chocolate. And we brought it home and put it on the table. And the whole family came to look at it. And then we were dancing some ritual dances around that. Absolutely happy that we are like the Westerners having such a good product. And you will not believe me, after so many years of being on the single market, the people still go to Austria to do the shopping. So there is probably something wrong. And that's why we are addressing this dual quality in the legislation. I know that in the parliament there are proposals to put it on the blacklist of unfair commercial practices. Now it's in the text. This is, I think, a good topic for negotiations where this will be best placed. I want to explain how we mean it, because there are many concerns at the level of traders, and understandable concerns, because the traders say, how will it look like in the national legislation? Will it be the traders or the producers to be blamed for that? Yeah, and many practical issues which they raise. So I want to emphasize that we want to address the obvious, manifestly clear cheating of some kinds of products. We are proposing to accept the legitimate reasons for differences, but the burden will be on the producer. Why the difference is there? There has to be case-by-case assessment based on evidence. That's why we are conditioning it by the testing. And the last but the most important thing, we are not going to dictate taste. We are not going to dictate price. So these are the aspects which we took into consideration and proposed this in the omnibus proposal. All the other elements comparing with the position of the Council are more or less clear or negotiable, maybe some details, but these are the things which will require further work. And the Commission, and I want to declare it very clearly today, is ready to negotiate good compromises, not to compromise the quality and the practical impact of the proposal, because as Madame Gebhardt said, this is the part of our work which is very positive, very practical for the EU citizens. They understand what we are doing here, why we are doing that. So I think that we should not disappoint them, and we should really do our best to do this before the end of the mandate of this Parliament and consequently Commission. Let me pause a while on transparency of online operators. We see that many members of the Parliament would like more measures, and many amendments have been tabled in relation to liabilities for the omission of required information, for removing illegal information, and for prohibiting fake consumer reviews. Our proposal indeed did not go that far, because we think that the current rules, already current version of the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive or the E-Commerce Directive, cover such issues. For example, omission of information is an unfair commercial practice, and platforms have an obligation to act and remove illegal content when notified about a breach. To ensure more effective, proportionate and dissuasive penalties, the Commission proposed a list of common parameters, the criteria for national authorities to use when deciding on the level of penalties. The list is, however, indicative and non-exhaustive, allowing national enforcers to take into account specificities in each case. It was another very intensively debated point with the member states, because they say penalties, it's our sovereign national competence. But I think I managed to explain that more and more we will see the big mass harm cross-border problems and cases. When this happens, then the people see that it's cheap to cheat in some specific country. It's also a moral hazard in it. So that's why we said, let's clarify the criteria for the penalties, let's agree on it in the EU, and let's harmonize the level of the penalties, because I think that it's important that we have the same or comparable approach in all the member states. On the right of withdrawal for goods, well, what happened here? Some might see it unlogical that the commissioner working for the good for the consumers is suddenly coming with something which doesn't seem to be good for the consumers. Well, many times we encountered in the history the cases when the dishonest people spoil something to honest people, and this is exactly this case. We have so many complaints, and from the assessment of the current legislation, we had a very wide consultation process, and we really received a lot of complaints about behavior of people who buy the new goods, the shoes, they use them 1 week, and then they bring it back and want the full amount. This is dishonest behavior. They want full price for second-hand goods. And these are the people who are cheating. That's why we wanted to address this issue, and we wanted to clarify and simplify the rules for everyone. Well, yes, the traders are happy about that, and the people who do not cheat, they understand why we are doing that. But this will be the matter of negotiations, of course, and the Commission is ready to consider. On representative actions proposal, this is a major step forward for the protection of consumers. I can tell you I was not happy about Dieselgate, but suddenly on this case we saw that the mass harm, which affected more than 8 million owners of cars in the EU, such a mass harm has to be in majority of states solved in case the people want the redress individually. Each individual has to go to the court and ask for the redress or compensation. For the redress and compensation, which is very difficult to determine for the court, because what is the damage? Yeah, we had many debates about that. And we simply see that there is a very different approach in the member states. There are states which have some collective redress already. There are states which do not have anything. And here I am also in the capacity of Justice Commissioner. If we come with a smart format of collective redress for all the member states, the justice system will be less burdened, because it is a difference if 100 people will go individually than rather than 1,000 together in one step, in one litigation case. So I think that this has a strong impetus, or strong also social demand and social call for having such instrument. We are not dictating the format. We want the member states which already have collective redress of some format to keep it, and those which do not have anything to come with or to accept this proposal and do the national version of the collective redress, which will fit with their legal tradition. It must be also emphasized. It was not easy to come with this proposal because, and something that is, this is the weak point of this proposal, that we enable the member states to keep their form or to work with, on some proposal which will be country specific. But just imagine in this case, we are invading into the world of civil procedural law. Anytime the EU does this, there is a big revolution or how to say, protest at the level of, you see what's happening? Protest at the level of the member states that the EU should not invade in this. That's why there is the flexibility. The strict parameter we will be stubborn on is the existence and nomination of qualified entities. You know that in the proposal there is criteria to determine such entities. There are conditions for the financing. Why? Because we do not want to create any kind of litigation business in Europe. We want more fairness. We want more justice. We want better access to justice for the people who suffer from harm and done by the unfair traders or producers. We don't want to create this kind of business which they have in the United States. That's why we proposed qualified entities to be nominated by the states. How this will work in practice, it will be very interesting to see. Because you know that we came with the collective redress proposal which should address the consumers' disputes. But the consumers' disputes, it's about services, energy sector, different kinds of services, including travel services, energy sector, telecommunications, financial sector, which is heavily criticized. This is always up on the highest, on the prominent place in our consumer scoreboard as the most risky sector, where the people suffer from mass harm very often. For the traditional kinds of consumer disputes. And that's why it will be interesting how the member states will take this, because they could nominate one or several representative bodies which will have the universal outreach and scope of work. But they could also nominate specialized bodies, for instance, financial ombudsman, or the enforcer of in the field of telecommunications and so on. So it will be interesting, and again, there is flexibility for the member states. I speak too long, I'm afraid. Didn't we want some questions? Well, I did, but sorry, I have to leave. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Also ich denke, es war auch richtig und gut, dass Sie so ausführlich hier dargestellt haben, was das Anliegen, das politische Anliegen der Europäischen Kommission ist, weil wir haben natürlich auch sehr heftige Diskussionen und auch Widerrede in vielen Fragen. Und ich muss gerade sagen, auch in dem Bereich der Sammelklagen, ich verstehe die Leute nicht. Auch meine Kollegen nicht, die behaupten, dass der Vorschlag der Europäischen Union die Gefahr von Class Actions à la USA vor sich tragen. Also da muss ich einfach sagen, entweder haben diese Kollegen den Text nicht gelesen oder sie interpretieren ihn böswillig. Denn das da herauslesen zu wollen, ist schlicht und einfach sehr, sehr unmöglich, weil da sehr viele Punkte eingebracht worden sind, die eben gerade dem entgegenwirken, dass solche Class Actions à la USA da eingeführt werden. Und ich denke, es ist eine gute Sache, dass wir da so ein gutes Papier als Grundlage bekommen haben. Aber ich möchte jetzt kein Co-Referat machen. Ich hätte noch die Lust, noch zu anderen Punkten jetzt was zu sagen. Aber ich werde mich mal zurückhalten. Frau Jourova hat mir gesagt, dass sie um 12:30 gehen muss. Aber wir haben ja Ihre Generaldirektorin, die da ist, die dann auch auf einzelne Fragen noch mal eingehen kann, um dann noch einmal die Einzelheiten der Gesetzgebung vielleicht klarzustellen. Und es hat mich sehr gefreut, dass Sie gekommen sind, denn ich weiß, wie eng Ihr Termin, Ihre Agenda getaktet ist. Aber Sie sind eine, die das Europäische Parlament immer ernst genommen hat, und das wissen wir sehr zu schätzen. Danke schön, Frau Jourova. Ja. Ich denke, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren, wir gehen dann in unser Programm weiter und vorgesehen ist ein Vortrag von Frau Bianca Rodriguez Galindo, Leiterin der Abteilung Verbraucherrecht und Marketing der Generaldirektion Justiz. Und wenn ich es richtig sehe, haben Sie auch ein paar Slides vorgesehen. Wenn Sie bitte mit Ihrem Vortrag und die Einzelheiten noch einmal vorstellen wollen. Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
I don't know which one is better. You tell me if you cannot hear me. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gebhardt, for this introduction. I'm confronted to a very difficult task, or a very easy one, depending how you see it, because Commissioner Jourova has given you a very good overview of the New Deal proposal. So what is left for me, apart from the difficult questions that I might get from the audience? But let's try it in detail. I brought some slides which are focused on one of the two proposals which compose this package of the New Deal, which is the one that we call Omnibus, the proposal which modernizes a set of existing directives on consumer law. I'm happy to respond also to questions about representative actions, if any, but we had a long workshop, an interesting workshop organized also by your group last week. So today, now I'm focused on this, and then you ask questions about whatever you want, or Mrs. Gebhardt, Mr. Lanti, who are chairing, allow you to say. As the Commissioner gave you an overview, just let me remind to you what are the objectives of the New Deal, and in particular of the Omnibus proposal. You know that is not something that came out of the blue, but is the result of a long reflection on the side of the European Commission, what a fitness check of our current legislation, which resulted in that, well, the consumer law is in general fit for purpose, but the enforcement of this law can be enhanced, and then awareness of consumers, knowledge by traders, by professionals also can be improved. And in addition of this, as is obvious because of the evolution of the markets in the last years, in particular the digital markets, that some aspects of the law needed a bit of modernization, a bit of updating. So this is what I try to explain in these slides, what are the objectives of these proposals, better enforcement, modernization, burden reduction, the very unpopular proposal on right of withdrawal, we include that in this category, and then also clarification of certain rules. Mrs. Jourova referred to the dual quality situations. There are also other things like the doorstep sales or hidden advertising in search results. I will come to this in a minute if necessary and if time allows. In terms of better enforcement, Mrs. Jourova also spoke already about the harmonization on the rules of penalties, criteria that we propose. You have to, as you probably know, there are member states in which there are no real penalties for infringement to consumer laws. Others who impose rather high penalties. It is necessary at the level of the internal market to have some kind of harmonization, some common rules, including because we have this regulation which is going to come into force in 2020, the Consumer Protection Regulation, which will enhance also the coordination among public authorities in the control and enforcement of consumer law. And there, if the penalties are not a minimum harmonized, this coordination cannot be very effective. In addition to the criteria to establish penalties, we also propose that when these penalties take the form of fines, that they are established by member states. The maximum of these fines should be at the minimum 4% of the turnover of the trader in the member states or member states concerned. You know that some member states have penalties as high as 90% right now, others much lower, others just a lump sum, which is rather low. So a bit of common rules are necessary here. Another aspect of this for better enforcement is the proposal for remedies. That I'm just going to mention that a bit more in detail because it was not mentioned before. What we have noticed is that infringement, in particular to the unfair commercial practice directives, are very, very extended. in the European Union as in other parts of the world for similar rules. And yet, there are no remedies for those infringements, at least not fixed at the level of the European Union. Therefore, in our view, the need for this proposal. In contractual situations, that these remedies include at least the termination of the contract, other remedies too, but this possibility available in case the infringement justified to use it, and in case of non-contractual situation, at least also, among other remedies, the compensation of the damages. I mentioned the other big objective, which is modernization to adapt the rules to the digital markets. Again, Mrs. Jourova mentioned that in rather detail, the transparency of platforms. But also another aspect important of this modernization is the extension of the rights, of the rules of the consumer right directives, and I apologize for the acronyms, but I think I'm talking to experts, to free digital services. Because right now, in these so-called free digital services, in other words, when you pay not by kind, but by giving your personal data, you don't necessarily have, you are paying, it's not free, and you are not necessarily entitled to the rights to pre-contractual information, the 14 days to withdraw from the contract, from the service. And this is also, we are also aligning the rules with the General Data Protection Regulation and the future Digital Content Directive in this respect, which is currently being negotiated. Oops, no, this one. The other aspect, objective of this proposal, the reduction of burden for business. I'm not going to extend too much on the right of withdrawal. Mrs. Jourova again referred to it. I'm sure that I'm going to have questions in this respect, and we are in discussion in particular with the European Parliament, the amendments already tabled by Mrs. Geber, by your people, by your committee, in this respect to get rid of the proposal on the right of withdrawal, to express it in a synthetic way. There are other things about the burden of reduction, less controversial, hopefully, that maybe I can mention it, not to distract your attention, because I'm sure I'm not going to manage, but to know in case you have not noticed. For example, that the model withdrawal form can be provided by other means than when the contracts are concluded by telephone or SMS, because right now, according to the rules, if you are contracting by SMS or by telephone, the withdrawal form should be provided, and as you very well understand, it's very difficult to provide a withdrawal form by SMS and even more by a telephone call. It has to be provided, but by other means. Are things that might be clear, make common sense, but they need to be addressed in the legislation to avoid misunderstandings. Or things like reference to obligation to have a fax, a number of fax, and to refer to it removed, because hardly anybody uses faxes nowadays anymore. I come from an old generation, and I still know what is a fax, and I still, I think, have the number of the fax in my business cards, but let's be honest, very, very few people use it nowadays. And then also a possibility to have other means, when contracted means of communication, as alternatives to the email, because it's true, traders and clients nowadays communicate in many different ways, including chats, and that has to be accepted, and that has to be considered as legal. But at the same time, we have to guarantee that the client, the consumer, can always trace back these communications in case there is a problem. Again, I'm doing that the other one. Here I mentioned in this slide, the slides can be made available to all of you, and some of you have seen already these tables about other amendments in the what I call in the sense of clarifying rules which exist already. One is the dual quality products that Mrs. Jourova explained. Another one is about the off-premises selling, what we call the doorstep selling. a marketing technique that we support and that it is very good. It has proved very good not only for the consumers but also for because it provides employment to a whole sector of the population, people who can only work half time. So it's not that we want to ban this type of marketing technique, but we want to protect our consumers and in particular vulnerable consumers. And it happens, and it's the case in some member states more than others, of aggressive unsolicited visits to the domicile of the people, or what we call commercial excursions, which people are taking on excursion and in fact they are lobbied and very heavily to buy something. So those are the practices that we have tried to address, opening the possibility for member states to regulate further against this practice or to limit them further. Then another thing of these clarifications, which is also related to this adaptation of the rules to the digital market, is about the hidden advertising in search results. That by a modification to the rules of the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive, to the annex of the rules, we want to make clear that when a search is the result of sponsoring by somebody is paying, it has to be made clear to the consumer. It's not forbidden, it is fully, it's a legal practice, but it has to be made clear that the product or the service which appears in the top or in a particular position appears there not for other qualities or things, but because the trader, the company who is behind is paying for it, and fair enough, but it has to be made clear. Again, so this is it for me. I know that there are questions about this, about what Mrs. Jourova mentioned before. I will be happy to address those, and as I said before, if it happens that there are also questions about the representative action proposal, I'm happy to answer. It's the other leg, very important element of this package of the New Deal. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Frau Rodriguez. Ich meine, jetzt ist klar geworden, worum geht es, worüber sprechen wir. Aber nun ist es auch an der Zeit, auch mal die Betroffenen auch zu Wort kommen zu lassen, die dann uns durchaus unter unterschiedlichen Gesichtspunkten heraus Bemerkungen machen werden. Und deswegen freue ich mich sehr, dass ich Frau Ziada El Ramli hier begrüßen darf, Generaldirektorin des Europäischen Verbandes von Online-Plattformen und Tech-Firmen, die natürlich direkt betroffen sind, neben den Verbrauchern und Verbraucherinnen. Und ich bin sehr gespannt auf Ihre Ausführungen. Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much. Thank you, MEP Gebhardt. Let me maybe start by, so ADEMA represents the online platforms and the platform economy, actually. So also platform using companies. On the New Deal for consumers, I think one thing where we need to take stock of where we stand is we actually commend the Commission on their ambitious program and ambitious proposal in trying to clarify certain elements of the consumer rules that apply today in areas where there are gaps. So, frankly, from an initial standpoint towards the proposal, we very much welcome the clarifications. We're always asking for more enforcement in terms of the current legislation that we have, making sure that the legislation is in place and that it's used properly. So that's all is very much down the route that we see things progressing as well. And frankly, in terms of the areas of concern that we had with the initial proposal put forward by the Commission, there were a couple of areas, one mainly being with a potential overlap with the GDPR, very much down the route of the free services and what the implications of that are. We had, within the context of the the contract rules for the supply of digital content, we had the EDPS opinion at the time as well, clarifying issues that might come up from considering data as a form of counter-performance or payment. And though that was one of our concern areas that we maintain with this proposal, the other one is, again, with regards to free services, when it comes to pre-contractual information, because how do you, first of all, would we be pushed into a situation where we would have to have an agreement and contract with the end consumer? And what would that mean in terms of data collection on the consumers as a result of that, to be able to have that agreement? So there are quite general concerns. There were points of clarification more than anything. Now that's on the initial proposal, where I can honestly say, I think, again, the EDPS came with a follow-up opinion, which we welcome very much. But we do have concerns about some of the amendments that were put forward in the House here. Not because we don't understand where they're coming from. We understand the rationale behind it, but we think they need further clarification. If I may, I'm just going to read out some of the main areas of concern that we have. One is with regards to, well, online reviews is a cluster of concerns there. When you have definitions like the online marketplaces are liable for the comprehensiveness and completeness of their self-evaluation tools, we wonder how can you qualify that? Are we creating a situation where in this mechanism that is supposed to clarify the rules, we're creating more definitions that will need to be interpreted through litigation, which would be a shame. Another area that we're worried about is on some of the transparency requirements. One being there was an amendment put forward on paid-for results, including indirect remuneration or other than money. Again, what is the exact reference point that we're trying to address there? None of the issues that we have, I don't think, are unresolvable. I think we can reach a solution. It's just we need to clarify them further so that we create legal certainty. On pre-contractual information requirements under the CRD, there is an amendment put forward that we need to include when algorithms were used to present offers or determine prices, include personalized pricing techniques. There, it goes slightly beyond what was in the original proposal by the Commission to indicate when there is a form of sponsorship. And so what we would like to think about is the user experience. Bearing in mind that maybe some of us still use our computers to go and make online purchases or deal with the online platforms, but very often it's on a mobile screen. So what does that mean? And if I may go a few years back when we were talking about the CRD at the time, there was a proposal from the Commission on having icons at the time. There was even a project of suggested icons by the Commission at the time, which was, from the Commission side, very progressive because they were trying to actually help out. But we just need to think about the format that we're using today in terms of using the services and where that might go in the long run. And then the big area of concern for us is obviously when it comes to intermediary liability and some of the amendments that are put forward there. There's a call to impose legal liability upon the operators of an online marketplace if they fail to remove misleading information provided by traders once they've been notified by a supplier. So the notification process, we definitely want to make sure that there's clarification on the notification process, because we have got data and evidence on the fact that that can mean anything. We've had notifications being sent by written letter to the headquarters of a platform. Well, you could say, yes, they have addressed it to the platform, but it isn't through the right channels. So making sure that we have got verifiable and some form of an accountable way of notification. Online platforms obliged to take reasonable steps to ensure that the service they provide are not subject to misuse, and here comes the key word, to monitor activity which suggests that the trader is purporting to be a non-trader in order to influence consumer choice. Or there's another amendment that says a duty to monitor activity that can harm consumers. What are we asking the platforms to be doing here? So we're not only asking for a monitoring of the service offering, but we're asking to interpret where the veracity of the claims that are being made by the platform. That goes very far in terms of what is actually being asked of the platform when you're looking at the scale and what it would entail, because this is not a normal filtering technology which not all platforms have. Let's be very clear, not all platforms today have content recognition technology, but this would not be done but through content recognition technology because there's no context. So you're asking about human intervention. For the big platforms, that's one thing, but I'm not sure that all of my members would even be very happy with that obligation. But what about the European platforms that are much smaller in scale, but very active? What is the implication there? I can go through another few of the amendments and happy to have a discussion on the specific amendments, but I'm not sure. I would like to hear from the other panelists as well. So I look forward to a debate, and if there's anything I can respond to from a platform perspective, that's what I'm here for, so please feel free to ask. Yes, thank you.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank für diese Sicht aus der Branche der Plattformen. Natürlich werden die Dinge durchaus unterschiedlich angesehen. Und ich freue mich sehr jetzt, dass ich auch zwei Professoren und Professorinnen dann noch zu Wort kommen lassen kann, die aus einer ganz anderen Perspektive heraus ihre Bemerkungen machen werden. Herr Professor Guido Smorto von der Universität Palermo in Italien. Sie haben ja schon sehr viel publiziert zum Thema Regulierung der Plattformwirtschaft auf europäischer Ebene. Finden Sie sich denn wieder in diesen Vorschlägen, die die Europäische Kommission bzw. die Änderungsanträge, die wir gemacht haben, oder haben Sie noch ganz andere Gesichtspunkte? Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much. First of all, I apologize because I have to go away 15 minutes before the end because I have my plane back to Barcelona, so sorry about that. But I hope I can listen to your questions, the majority of your questions. So a new deal for consumer. I want to focus not so much on each proposal that has been said and the amendments, but more on how to adapt consumer rules to the digital revolution. So I'm more focused on the digital revolution, and by a digital revolution I mean a world where we have a shift from product to platform, so where the big firms are no longer firms that directly sell their product or provide their service, but instead they provide a marketplace where independent agents provide their own service and sell their goods, where we have a massive provision of services by non-professionals, which is new, where we have the big data era. We all know what it means, what it implies. And if we look farther, where we have new challenges for consumer market, like, for example, artificial intelligence or Internet of Things. But I won't go so far. So what I consider, let me say that I think that the New Deal for Consumer prepared by the Commission is a significant proposal. I think it's valuable. It can be, of course, amended, but the overall judgment, I think, is very. First of all, is a valuable proposal. Second, it's balanced because doesn't undermine the current legal framework, which is working well. And so I want to focus in these few minutes on. Does it? Thank you. On 5 points that you can see here: enforcement, transparency of both terms and conditions and price, special focus on vulnerable consumers, to peer-to-peer transactions, and a final word on competition. Oh, that's, sorry.
The one at the bottom.
This one?
Yes.
Thank you. No. Enforcement. We have to enforce. So a lot has been said so far on collective action. I think here the challenge is about implementation, because it's not easy to have at the same time a system of collective redress that fully compensate victims, at the same time produce optimal deterrence, and do that, prevent any form of abusive litigation, and also do that in a cost-effective way, in a simple way. But I don't want to stop on that. I want to focus instead of two other points, which is the role of platforms, because I think that what Siada Ramli said about the responsibility of platforms raised serious concern. I think this is a very important point, but at the same time I think that considering when it's possible to think about an enforcement liability for user action for the platform, it's an important point. Of course, in some cases this is possible, other cases it's not, but still it's something that should be investigated. and a similar concern relates to the role of platform in adjudicating litigation among the two sides of the platform, because in some cases they can be in a good position to do that, in other cases no, simply because they may have competitive reasons, strategic reasons in some cases to favor one side of the platform. So in some cases we can rely on that, in some cases we cannot. This is for enforcement. The second point is on terms and condition transparency. And we all know we have empirical evidence that suggests that consumers, on average, when they enter into a contract, they don't read terms and conditions. So how to do with that? A first solution can be to impose simplified and shorter terms and conditions. It has been shown in many cases that it is possible to say exactly the same thing in a simple language, in a shorter terms. And so this is maybe one first thing to do. The second one is not just rely on terms and conditions, but also on the expectation, the ex-ante expectation that consumer may get, for example, from the presentation format of a web page. So if a format of a web page suggests that the platform is the service provider, this is to be taken into account, for example. So not just to rely on terms and conditions, but also on any element that consumer take into account when and producing her own expectation. And the third point I want to stress on transparency on terms and conditions is not just transparency, but a review, the need to review in some cases the blacklist of unfair terms. I've been investigating terms and conditions adopted by many platforms, and this is a survey of standard form contracts I had, and I could find in almost any platform the possibility for the platform to change unilaterally the conditions with a presumption of acceptance of this change, right to terminate, suspend account or delist product, choice of law and jurisdiction, class action and jury trial waiver, bonding clause and exemption clause of all kinds. In some cases, these may be justified because the platform has the need to rule the marketplace in a way which is very effective. In other cases, some of these terms can be questioned. The other point I want to stress is about price transparency. Usually price is a salient term, so there is less need for protection for these kind of things because consumers usually do pay attention to price, of course. But for example, price discrimination is now much easier than in the past. With big data, we have a lot of information on how consumers behave, on their pattern of spending, on our preferences. And so when is possible to charge price discrimination means charging different prices to each consumer based on the willingness to pay. I'm not saying this is illegal, I'm saying that we have to think under which circumstances this is to be permitted and when not. For example, what if price discrimination is based on gender or is based on country? Do we want this to be allowed or not? This is a question to be posed with this kind of practices. And Another aspect is the new techniques, the pressure selling techniques that are adopted sometimes by platforms. So, for example, you have the 92% of rooms already booked in the city for this weekend, so hurry up. So check if we can rely on these things. And so I think we have a need to revise the rationale for pricing strategies and see, because usually for price discrimination, the conventional explanation by economists is it's useful because it helps us to equilibrate supply and demand, but this is real, always real in the old economy. In the new economy, you may have other ways to avoid queues and to equilibrate the two sides. Vulnerable consumers. I think with the in the digital world, we have, first of all, to think who's vulnerable, because vulnerability is not just a one-dimensional thing. It's something that changes depending on the context. We may be vulnerable to something, not vulnerable to other things. So it depends on our characteristics, circumstances, type of market, product, service, and so on. And it can derive, again, from the massive gathering of data by the platform. So it opens to market manipulation. So it is possible now to present, filter, personalize information in ways that may exploit some kind of vulnerabilities. So I think it's important, first of all, to think who is vulnerable in the online market and how this changed compared to the old economy, and to take into account this vulnerability. For example, we may rely on a vast literature which derived from behavioral sciences that offer many suggestions on how the vulnerability is changing and how to prevent this kind of vulnerabilities. Not to prevent vulnerability, but to protect this kind of vulnerabilities in the online environment. Consumer-to-consumer transaction. I said at the beginning that we live in a world where we have a massive provision of service by non-professional, and these may create new market failures. If a non-professional drivers drive a car, if a non-professional hotelier provide accommodation, we have all sorts of new market failures that can arise, and this must be taken into account in order to solve market failures or to make a regulation of this market. In this sense, it's important, but platforms are already doing that, to offer voluntary guarantees in order to prevent these market failures. It's something that the biggest platform already do. And I would add, it's also important to have some ex-ante remedies. I mean, I'm reacting from a literature that says in peer-to-peer transaction where the two parties are private parties, we need to rely just on ex-post remedies, so harm-based remedies, damages. And I think that at least, and the argument goes like, this is in order to avoid to stop innovation. We have to favor innovation, so it's important to have ex-post remedies, not just ex-ante remedies. I think at least for those basic expectations we have on health, on safety, the expectation that we have regardless the professional, non-professional provision of that service, it's also important to think on some basic requirements that works ex-ante, not ex-post. So it's important also to take into account consumer-to-consumer transactions. And the last point I want to address, and then I'm open to your question, of course, is competition, because competition is probably the most effective way to protect consumers. And so we have to think what is consumer arm in the digital economy, which doesn't always correspond to increased price. Of course, we need to make it easier the switching from a platform to another. In some cases, we may even think about automatic ways of switching and preventing lock-in. Preventing lock-in doesn't just work for the platform economy, it can be important also in the next future. Let's think about Internet of Things. So if you are within a platform, it's then difficult to switch to another platform if you are embedded in that system. So, of course, to review and possibly broaden data portability. And the last point I want to say is about, I mean, it's a difficult argument. It would require days and another conference to discuss that. But one main factor of competition, which is data, and find ways that are respectful of property rights and competitive advantages of each platform, but at the same time find ways to create public data sets, to create data sharing, to open data as much as possible. And I stop here. Thank you.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Herr Professor Smorto, für diese wirklich sehr, sehr interessante Darstellung. Und ich greife einfach mal einen Punkt heraus. Sie sprachen ja auch über die Preisdiskriminierung. Und das ist ein Thema, das uns auch sehr stark beschäftigt hier im Europäischen Parlament. Aber mir kommt dabei noch ein Gedanke, vielleicht können wir später noch darüber diskutieren, mit Produkte on Demand, mit der 3D-Technologie, in denen immer mehr personifizierte Angebote gemacht werden, wird natürlich die Vergleichbarkeit von Preisen für die Verbraucher immer schwieriger. Und da wird es umso wichtiger sein, dass die Grundlage, die Kriterien, auf welcher Grundlage die Preisgestaltung denn eigentlich da ist, tatsächlich dargeboten wird. Das ist eines der Themen, denke ich, die wir dann in Zukunft vielleicht noch ein bisschen stärker noch im Blick haben sollten, aber nicht um sofort darüber zu beantworten, sondern ich gebe jetzt gerne Frau Professorin Annelies Siborny von der Universität Louvain das Wort. Sie sind eine Expertin im Bereich des europäischen Verbraucherschutzrechtes. Sie forschen und publizieren insbesondere zum Spannungsfeld Wirtschaft und Recht sowie Verbraucherverhalten. Und ich bin ganz gespannt auf Ihre Ausführungen. Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort. Vielen Dank. Darf ich den Klicker
haben? Thank you very much. In this brief presentation, I'd like to start by drawing a fairly obvious distinction between views from academia and the pragmatism that we need to have in this present discussion. And I want to highlight two things that I think are very precious in the proposal standing before you at the moment, the provisions on fines and the right to private remedies. And I'd like to also point to one thing in particular I think would be good to reconsider in this proposal, and that's the justification for what might be termed deharmonization when it comes to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. So this is where I live. This is my nice little ivory tower. So over there, what people say about the Modernization Directive is, well, they're quite critical, frankly. The draft directive is criticized on a number of counts. The New Deal for Consumer is portrayed as a pig in the poke, as a bad hand for consumer. It is also said that it doesn't actually draw very much on the extensive fact-finding exercise some of us have participated in, that it doesn't go far enough, and that it is unclear on several points. I do share some of these opinions, but where are we standing now? The directive is before you, before the Parliament. We don't have much time, and I'm not talking about the 8.5 minutes that I have left. I'm talking about the time that is left for discussion of this proposal. We are all aware that this is not a priority of the current presidency. So the real question is the proposal for the modernization directive better than nothing? Yes, you'll be able to negotiate some amendments, but I think it's out of the question, frankly, that you might be able to do anything very far-reaching in the time that is left. So to this question, is this better than nothing? I'd say a resounding yes, if only for two reasons. First, the sanctions, up to 4% of worldwide turnover for large infringements. That is a game changer. We need this. Private enforcement, I'd say it's an important first step. Let me elaborate on these 2 points. Fines. This is what is going to make it to the Financial Times. This will mean that EU consumer law will be on the radar of large multinational companies a lot more clearly than it currently is. It will say to the world that the EU is serious not only about competition law, where fines can reach up to 10% of worldwide turnover, not only about data protection law, which also provides for fines up to 4% of worldwide turnover, but also about consumer rights. And I think the EU is in a unique position in the worldwide conversation about consumer protection. The EU has a role as a leader in this conversation. And I think this provision on fine is absolutely essential. There's a lot else that needs to be discussed and changed, yes, but this is going to send a very important message internationally. So don't listen to anyone who tells you to water down the fines. Second, private remedies. The modernization directive will add horizontally to all the directives that will be amended essentially these 3 paragraphs saying that member states shall ensure that contractual and non-contractual remedies are also available for consumers under the various target directives. And then there is minimum harmonization about contractual remedies at a minimum, giving the right to terminate the contract, and non-contractual remedy at a minimum, obtain compensation. Again, back home in the ivory tower, this is criticized. My esteemed colleagues say that this does little more than establish a basic principle, leaving all the details to the member states, and frankly, they are right. And some ask a host of wonderful questions. Will remedies have retroactive effects? Is fault required? Does any unfair contractual practices justify termination? Is the right to damages applicable only when there is a contract, or also when there is damage but there is no contract? Will member states be allowed to apply some restrictions that's internal to their laws to contractual and non-contractual remedies? Will consumers have to prove a causal link? All these questions will arise. But from where we stand now, I think the most important thing to remember is that the fact that this provision is incomplete, and again, it is incomplete, should not be a reason to reject it. Let's remember, this is a directive. Now, we, including the Commission perhaps, sometimes tend to forget that directives are meant to articulate principles, not to work out every detail. It would take a regulation to work out all these points that I mentioned and more. And even if we had the draft regulation on our desk tomorrow morning, it would be of no use because there would be no political support for such a regulation. So here I'd like to introduce an analogy with competition law. In competition law, the right to private remedy was introduced not by legislation, but by the court in 2 cases, in Courage and then Manfredi. And let me quote the court here. In Courage, the first case, seminal case, the court said the full effectiveness of the prohibition in Article 101, paragraph 1 would be, the effectiveness of this would be put at risk if it weren't open to any individual to claim damages for loss caused to him by a contract or conduct liable to restrict competition. This is about the same level of generality as the provision in the draft directive. It says there must be an action at national law. And this changed the law. In many member states, there was no possibility to obtain damages in competition law cases. This was a first step. Of course, there were still hurdles, and some of these hurdles were taken care of by a directive several years later, 13 years later, in the Directive on Damage Action. And there are still pieces of the puzzle missing. There is still no collective redress for for damages caused by violations of competition law. But first steps are important, and we shouldn't forego the opportunity to take this first step, even if it is incomplete. Now, the point I am drawing your attention to is a point that is restricting the scope of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. It has been mentioned by a previous speaker. Member states would be allowed to regulate aggressive or misleading marketing or selling practices in two contexts: unsolicited visits to the home of a consumer or commercial excursions. What are we talking about here? For example, we're talking about good stones accidentally meeting a large window, oops, and then just by chance some trader is coming to your home to offer window repair services. Now, understandably, if this becomes locally a problem of not minor scale, national authorities will want to take action. But at the moment, they cannot because of maximum harmonization of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. This is the type of issue that is at stake here. But because taking a step back from maximum harmonization isn't exactly the general trend in competition law, this gives right in the proposal to no less than 3 different justifications. Let's take a look at them: subsidiarity, private life, and clarification. Bear with me. Subsidiarity. Okay, I can understand that there may be a local problem with people throwing stones at windows in some member state. But how is that specific, the subsidiarity issue, to doorstep selling and excursions? I'm sure there are a number of other practices which can be developed locally and become a problem locally. So the subsidiarity justification is hardly specific to this. And if you want to keep a subsidiarity justification, I cannot tell you what sort of analogies people are going to put forward to deharmonize further. Private life. Now, I can kind of understand that there might be a private life issue with doorstep, people coming to your home. But excursions? I'm sorry, I just don't see the link. And in any event, why would it have to be national law that protects private life? Don't we have an article in the Charter of Fundamental Rights that's EU law? Because it's private life, it should be national law? I'm not following here. And last, it would clarify the relationship between national law and EU law. Now, please, we're talking about a maximum harmonization directive. The relationship between EU law and national law has never been clearer than with maximum harmonization. It means member states cannot go further than the directive. That's as clear as it gets. So, in a nutshell, those justifications, individually and taken together, are utterly unconvincing. And there is an additional problematic reference to the fact that those practices are unlikely to have cross-border effects. Maybe so for doorstep selling, but for excursions. Don't you have excursions from Brussels to Lille, for example? Isn't that cross-border? And more, from a more principled perspective, cross-border effect has never been an element relevant to the scope of application of EU consumer law. That's the difference with internal market law and with judicial cooperation. So, this whole part is utterly unconvincing, and I think it's also dangerous, and that is why I'm calling your attention to it. It's dangerous because it's an invitation to reason by analogy and deharmonize further. So what I would propose if I were to take part in this discussion is to say, let's be honest. Let's admit it's political. And draft the justification much more narrowly. Drop the reference to subsidiarity, to privacy, and to clarification. Please, at least clarification. Make it sound fact-based. I'm hoping it is fact-based. And it's better to have a justification that sounds contingent rather than absurd. Maybe you could go for something along the lines of, in the light of the need to take swift action against some unfair practices which may develop locally, and in light of the experience at national level, da-da-da. I think that's a much more contained justification. To wrap up, adopt the directive. That's the main thing. It's worth it because of sanctions and private enforcement, even if it's otherwise imperfect. And consider amending the justifications for restricting the scope of UCPD. Thank you.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Frau Professorin Siboni. Ich muss sagen, also das war ein schönes Plädoyer für mehr Europa. Das kann uns pro Europäer und pro Europäerin nur recht sein. Und ich denke, Sie haben ganz recht, man kann eigentlich noch sehr viel mehr machen, aber machen wir wenigstens diesen ersten Schritt, der hier gegangen wird, um Europa auch besser zu gestalten. Und ich denke, was auch gerade zum Schluss sehr überzeugend war, ist zu fragen, warum denn Subsidiarität im Verbraucherrecht, wo es eigentlich tatsächlich nichts zu suchen hat, weil Verbraucher und Verbraucherinnen sind überall Verbraucher und Verbraucherinnen und Produkte und Geschäfte sind überall Produkte und Geschäfte. Und da versteht man nicht so recht, warum da so viel mit Subsidiarität zu tun hat, aber vielleicht ist es einfach auch dem Trend der Zeit geschuldet. Aber wir sollten nicht jeden Trend jederzeit immer mitspielen. Das ist höchst gefährlich, auch für die Zukunft einer Gesellschaft. Dankeschön also für Ihre Ausführungen. Und jetzt last but not least heißt es immer so schön, die Vertreterin des Europäischen Verbraucherschutzverbandes BEUC oder BEUC, ich weiß immer nicht, wie man es richtig aussprechen soll, aber auf jeden Fall sehr bekannt für den Einsatz für die Rechte der Verbraucher und Verbraucherinnen. Und ich bin auch ganz gespannt auf Ihre Ausführungen. Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. My name is Patricia Gauthier, I represent BEUC. I say BEUC, but actually our policy is that we can pronounce it in different ways depending on our language. So there are colleagues that say BEUC, BEUC as well in French. So feel free to pronounce however you want. Just maybe for those in the room that do not know us yet, we are the European Consumer Organization. We are an umbrella organization and we represent 43 consumer organizations across Europe from 32 countries, and we represent them towards the EU institutions. We are here today to talk about the New Deal for consumers. We as BEUC have been very much involved in the refit process, in all the discussions we had also with the Commission, and we very much agree with the main message that came out of the refit report, that the consumer law is indeed fit for purpose, but there is still a lot missing in the enforcement area. There is not enough yet in terms of the digital markets. So here we've been very happy with that the Commission took the results of the refit process into the account in making those two proposals, one for the representative actions and the other one on better enforcement and modernization of consumer law. Today we will talk about the omnibus proposal only, so I will focus on that. I just chose several categories of topics that were tackled by this proposal, and I'm going to go swiftly through them. The first one is penalties. I also agree that that's one of the most important parts of the proposal and one that could have a huge impact on consumers. We've seen already in the past, in our work, that the landscape we have currently in the EU is very fragmented and the sanction levels vary significantly. We, as BOC, we get involved in what we call coordinated enforcement actions. And in that respect, sometimes we also alert the authorities if we know about certain infringements. And as a result of such actions, we could see that the authorities, they issue penalties in such different levels that consumers are not equally protected, we think, across Europe. That's why we very much support the new rules that the proposal suggests on the maximum penalties. We also support the idea to allocate the revenues from the fines to the general interest of consumers. And that also includes the expansion even of this provision that was made by the rapporteur, Daniel Dalton. I hope this is going to be still discussed because we think that the penalties that always go to the national budgets, they're not necessarily spent in a way that could help with the consumer protection issues. What we see as a potential for improvement, we would like to see the alignment of the proposed provisions with the GDPR. So we would suggest not only to express the maximum fine in the percentage of the trader's turnover, but also in the amount of money. Like in the GDPR, we would suggest 10 million euros, and then also for the percentage, we would think that it's better to do it as in the GDPR already, that it should be a trader's total worldwide annual turnover. And then the authority or the court, depending which is issuing the penalty, should decide whichever is higher, and that would be the maximum penalty it could impose. What we see as a problematic change that was suggested to the proposal is a linking the possibility for the authorities to issue this maximum sanction with the fact that the coordinated action that was launched by the CPC network, so the network of the Consumer Protection Authority, has been concluded. Here we see many obstacles in practice since, well, first of all, those coordinated actions, if they are ever launched, they take years before they concluded. And second of all, sometimes those actions are never launched, even though the case fulfills all the criteria of the widespread infringement, because of different priorities of the authorities and many other aspects. So here we think that the authorities, if they are active and they do want to impose a sanction and they're dealing with the widespread infringements, they should be allowed to use this new provision. On the individual remedies, that's again one of the most important points of the proposal. We could see in the Volkswagen case, for example, we've been looking into the legislation of different member states, trying to figure out which of our members could sue Volkswagen, for instance, often on the basis of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And then in many countries we could see that the remedies are not available currently. So here that was a big gap that we identified, and we also communicated that to the Commission during the refit exercise, and we were very happy that such minimum individual remedies were added in the proposal. What we would suggest as an improvement would be an addition to an extra remedy of price reduction, since we see that this could be a remedy that could be preferential to many consumers. Another point that we see is missing is a standard remedy that should be added to the Consumer Rights Directive. And here we would suggest a right not to be bound by the contract or right to damages. Of course, on the right of withdrawal, no surprise here, we as BOC and all our members, consumer organizations, we reject what was proposed by the Commission in Omnibus proposal. We think that this would be a big deterioration of consumer rights. We see this right that we have now as one of the big factors that promotes e-commerce across Europe and allows consumers to actually benefit from that. we don't think there is enough evidence that could substantiate such an important change on the market in consumer rights. So apart from rejecting the changes that the Commission proposed, I also wanted to mention that we very much support the amendments that Mr. Gebhardt tabled on adding a practice of restricting or preventing consumers to use right of withdrawal to the annex of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. Indeed, our members are reporting to us that some consumers face problems to exercise their right of withdrawal. And we even recently had an event organized by our German member, Visit Bevet, who did a small research in this area, and they did bring many examples of such consumers. So I think this is a very good idea, and instead of limiting right of withdrawal, we should rather think of how to better enforce it. Okay. On the topic of transparency of online platforms, which we've already discussed a little bit with other speakers, I have to say right now consumers, they face a lot of confusion on the market. They often don't know who are they dealing with via the platform. Is it a trader? Is it a consumer? Is consumer law going to apply to them or not if they buy a specific product, for example? So there is also a big lack of transparency for them. That's why we very much support the new information requirements that the Commission put on the table. However, in our view, the scope of those provisions should be expanded to other types of online platforms, because right now the proposal focuses on the online marketplaces, and those are platforms where consumer goes to have a contract with the supplier. And in cases of platforms where consumer is being redirected to another website and he concludes his contract there, those websites will not be considered as online marketplaces. So in that situation, the new transparency provisions would not apply to them. And those would be comparison websites, for example, search engines, and so on. We very much support all the amendments that go into this direction to expand the scope of transparency provision. We also support the idea that it has to be disclosed if a third party did any kind of payment in order for it to be up in the search results. We think that this is a very good idea. Indeed, consumers should be informed about such practices. What we think is missing is the non-monetary remuneration, because we already hear about such practices, and we think that it should be also future-proof. And all type of remuneration should be included in that provision. Also, for example, commercial links between the trader and the platform, that is also one of the issues. For what consumers should be also informed about, except from what the Commission already proposed, we think that it's very good that that consumers will be informed about the about the ranking criteria. We think that they should also be informed about relative importance of this ranking, about this criteria, so that they understand a little bit better why they see this kind of search results and not the others. We also think that the use of the algorithms or automated decision-making should be disclosed to consumers, and that includes also personalized pricing. What is missing in the transparency of platforms part of the proposal? We think that there should be platform liability rules. And here we very much support the amendments that were tabled in this area. Of course, not that the platform would not be liable in all kinds of situations. We suggest that the platform should be liable in 3 types of situations. So the first one would be a failure to inform who actually is the supplier that the consumer is dealing with. The second one is with the misleading information, when the platform was made aware that, that what is being presented by the trader is misleading and did not take it down. And the third one relates to the problems with the contract performance, and that in cases when the platform has a control over supplier. So, for example, it's the platform who decides on the terms and conditions of the sale, on the price sometimes, on the delivery, and other aspects. Another point that is missing is consumer reviews. We think that this is the area that should be also regulated. The current reform of the consumer law is a very good opportunity to do that. We already have laws in place in France, at least, that deal with that. That's why we support also the amendments that were tabled in this area. On the dual quality, we've mentioned that Commissioner Jourova talked about it as well. As a consumer organization, we completely agree that there's no second-class consumers. We've seen also from our members' test results that differences between products available in different countries, they do exist. And the clarification that the Commission proposes to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive could help with the better enforcement, indeed. What we suggest as an improvement to the provisions proposed by the Commission is not only to talk about identical marketing, but also about seemingly identical marketing, because as we know, the packaging or the commercial materials that the companies are using, they're never exactly identical. They always differ with little elements. We also think that the criteria that the proposal sets, that the differences in composition have to be significant, and the criteria that the product has to be available in several other member states, we think they're too strict, and that would prevent consumers of being able to actually use this provision in enforcing their rights. So we would delete that part. And also, I wanted to talk about legitimate factors, because in the Commission proposal, there is a leeway for traders to change the composition of their products if some of the legitimate factors appeared. And then there is also a list, which was also expanded in some of the amendments I've seen. However, in our opinion, the legitimate factors, yes, they do exist, and they can justify traders to differentiate the product. However, they should not justify the traders to mislead consumers about that fact. So, okay, they can change the product, but they should inform consumers about it. So I would suggest that we don't mention the legislative factors, at least not as a justification to mislead consumers in that directive. And at the end, I wanted to maybe quickly to mention that we also notified certain situations that we think should be added to the annex of the UCPD directive, and that would be to tackle some of the problems we see on the market. One of the problems that our members were telling us about a lot in the last years are problems related to the resale of event tickets websites. And here, I'm not going to go too much into details because there are so many infringements that are linked to their practices. But what we think should be added to the annex would be the use of the bots, which is the automated software that is used to buy tickets in bulk. And that in cases if this is used afterwards to resell those tickets on at the price which is higher than a face value, and actually in practice, according to some reports, sometimes those prices they go even as high as 9 times the initial price, which is completely ridiculous, I have to say. And then a second practice that we would like to add to the annex is linked to the resale of tickets in cases where event organizers apply certain restrictions that prevent consumers who buy this ticket on the resale of tickets website to actually attend the event. Because the ticket is often personalized, for example, and as soon as they realize that the ticket was not bought from the official seller, the consumer is not allowed to attend the event, which of course the reselling of ticket websites don't inform consumers about. Another practice which we find as unfair is linked with promotional sales. And here, traders are informing about certain promotions, 20% off, but they don't give a reference price. So here we would like them to be obliged to give, first of all, the reference price, and second of all, to be able to prove that this reference price is correct for at least the last 30 days. And here I've seen that some of the members of the IMCO committee also recognize that this is the problem on the market, so we very much support the amendments that it put in this area. And the third practice that I've mentioned is linked to the online advertising on unhealthy food for children. And here, our food team is very much working on this issue, and we see this as a serious problem, which should be banned. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions later on.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank auch hier für diese Ausführungen, Frau Gauthier, die auch sehr aufschlussreich waren und die auch eine ganze Reihe von Problemen aufgezeigt haben, an denen wir weiter arbeiten sollten und die zu berücksichtigen sind. Und ich fürchte, Herr Smorto muss jetzt gehen. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Deswegen werden wir Sie nicht mehr fragen können, aber wir bleiben da auf jeden Fall in Kontakt, weil die Fragen, die sich stellen, durchaus sehr wichtig sind und diskutiert werden. Ich schaue mich jetzt gerade mal um auf meine Kollegen und Kolleginnen, ob Sie Fragen stellen möchten. Ja, Lisa, bitte.
So thank you very much. Actually, I had a question to Professor Smorto, but if somebody wants to comment my question, it's more universal and not very specific, because he mentioned these two words, vulnerable groups. And my question is, who are those vulnerable groups? Because if we take into account children and aging people, and some professors said that all citizens over 50 years old are vulnerable. So the old people are nearly vulnerable. And what we can do to protect them, because it's deeply political question, because we are in this room friends of consumer protection, but in the other room they are MEPs who are more worried about the competitiveness, what is happening for the European digital industry, because China has no rules and United States are developed their industry because without rules. So that, and nobody knows just now what is the outcome of the next term of office in the parliament and what kind of commission it is. And so the conclusion is that we should really have a European style. We are speaking many times European social model, and we should have a European digitalized model. And I'm not asking you to tell what is your opinion and your vision of this European digital model, but my question is still this, what are the vulnerable groups, because the majority of people is today vulnerable?
Ja, bevor ich den Experten und Expertinnen das Wort gebe, wollte ich vielleicht noch fragen, ich sehe keine weitere Nachfrage von Kollegen und Kolleginnen. Die anderen Anwesenden sind natürlich auch berechtigt, Fragen zu stellen. Deswegen schaue ich mich gerade im Raum um. Überlegen Sie sich Ihre Fragen, dann gebe ich zunächst einmal Frau Siboni das Wort und anschließend Frau Samri. Ja, bitte schön.
I think it's a great big question you're asking. It's one that needs to be tackled, but in a typically ivory tower academic way, I'm going to say there is a second question, even bigger behind your question. In the law as it stands, vulnerable consumers are a distinct category from the average consumer. So it makes sense because in part because we have this extraordinary standard of an average consumer who is normally diligent and attentive and reads terms and conditions and, is an unlikely hero. So because we have this unlikely figure as a reference point, and the modernization directive does nothing to tackle this huge problem, frankly, that's the elephant in the room, then, this is part of the problem, because the vulnerable consumer has, complements this notion. We need this category so much because we have such an unlikely standard to start with. So my own view is that we should revise the standard of the average consumer, have a much more realistic view of how people really behave. And here I would concur with my colleague who's left the room when he says we should draw a lot more on behavioral insights to think about how consumers, whether we call them average or something else, normally behave. And then maybe we would still need a category of vulnerable consumers, but it wouldn't have so much weight on it if we had a more realistic vision of consumers in general. Since for now we are not touching the average consumer standard, I think it was part of the questions looked at in the refit. One of the questions was whether at national level courts had come up with different criteria to define vulnerable consumers, and the results were different in different member states. By and large, though, the criteria that courts have been applying in cases that the reporters could find was mostly age or some specific impairment, handicap, but we still need to dig a lot deeper in, ordinary cognitive limitations of consumers faced with way too much information.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Remli.
Thank you. So I think going back to what Professor Smorta was saying, he actually took the vulnerability issue he broadened it much further beyond a category of a vulnerable consumer, more to vulnerable behavior that leads to every consumer being vulnerable at different instances. Now, if we look at it from that perspective, then I would actually go back to a concept that's not mine, but as MEP Dalton, he brings it up very often. I think he's right on that one, where we need to have, our aim has to be to have smart consumers. So that needs to be where we're going. So I definitely think we need consumer protection in place today to circumvent the major harm. But that shouldn't be our end goal. We need to be a little bit more ambitious. Also looking in terms of, let's look back 10 years. Consumer behavior has changed a tremendous deal online. And I think people are more aware of what's happening. If you look at my members, the platforms, there's a lot of investment being put by the big platforms. There I can honestly say it is happening in terms of consumer education and awareness raising. And I do think that there's a lot of scope for more improvement, not only from an industry side and from a voluntary perspective, but also through consultation with the consumer groups, with yourselves as legislators, where you hear it from your constituents as well, but to take it down that route of seeing how do we ensure that the European consumer in the future is more aware of what is happening online. And I'll use a very, very clear example, and it does go slightly back to the age issue. If I look at my mum, there are very often services, she's very, very good online. She uses lots of different services. But I do need to clarify things sometimes as to how the data is being used, what that might mean. It's nothing major, it's nothing sinister. It's just an understanding of what is actually happening. And I think that that needs to be our end goal, not just putting more protection in place, because that would be a shame. That would be a loss of using the platform ecosystem and its benefits to the maximum.
Dankeschön. Frau Rodriguez, Sie wollten auch noch dazu sagen.
Very briefly, because a lot has been said by my two predecessors, it will be very difficult to come with a notion of vulnerable consumers. Indeed, I confirm what are the outcomes of the refit exercise. Some trends about age, about certain handicaps. What I would like to say also is that the notion of vulnerable consumers might be different depending on which type of market transactions we are referring to. I refer myself to vulnerable consumer when I was referring to the doorstep selling. And there, what we had in mind, because it's a phenomenon that we have observed in several member states, it's age. Elderly people staying at home, being harassed, literally, but some sellers. It's not exactly the example of the stones on the window, which is a very good example, and it's indeed a problem, but also for utility contracts. I think you all, our parents all have experienced this, well, my parents, my mother certainly, somebody showing up at your door, convincing you to change the contract that you have with the electricity company. So this kind of thing, this was the vulnerability there was related to age, that somebody who was alone at home and was not able to confront that offer. So it changes depending on the market, depending on the type of transaction, and it's a notion which is difficult to tackle. That's my point.
Ja, danke schön. Ich sehe jetzt gerade keine weitere Wortmeldungen und ich schaue auch auf die Uhr. Es ist 16:50 Uhr. Deswegen denke ich, sollten wir zu einem Schluss kommen. Und ich möchte mich noch einmal bei allen Rednern und Rednerinnen bedanken. Es war wirklich eine sehr, sehr interessante, sehr informative Runde. Und wir haben tatsächlich eine große Anzahl von Themen angesprochen, die gingen von Datenschutz, freie Dienstleistungserbringung, Nutzung von Daten als Gegenleistung waren Stichwörter, Preisdiskriminierung oder Nichtdiskriminierung, die Verbraucherrechte im Zusammenhang mit dem Datenschutz, die Sanktionen, dass die Vorschläge unvollständig sind, noch weitergehend werden könnten oder auch die unterschiedlichen Qualitäten von Produkten oder aber sollen die Strafen berechnet werden auf Grundlage dessen, was in einem Staat erwirtschaftet wird oder nicht weltweit. Ich bin auch von der Meinung, wir sollten das weltweit angehen, weil nur so können wir auch wirklich eine Vergleichbarkeit auch für die Situation der Unternehmen auch ausgehen. Bis hin zum europäischen digitalen Modell, das wir noch erschaffen wollen. Also eine große Vielzahl von Themen. Es ist mir auch ganz bewusst, dass wir am Anfang eigentlich sind der Regulierung in diesem Bereich. Ein Anfang, der den Verbrauchern und Verbraucherinnen eine Hilfe geben soll. Aber die Themen sind noch so vielfältig, dass ich denke, dass wir noch in Zukunft, auch in der nächsten Legislaturperiode, noch einmal darauf zurückkommen müssen, um auf alle neuartigen Dinge, die auf uns zukommen, von denen wir heute noch gar nicht wissen, dass sie auf uns zukommen, auch entsprechend anzugehen. Denn diese Revolution, in der wir sind, ist eine sehr tiefgreifende, die auch die ganze Gesellschaft angeht. Und da müssen wir auch ethische Fragen damit verbinden, die angegangen werden müssen. Natürlich, Frau Ramny zum Beispiel, bin ich auch für die freie Dienstleistungswirtschaft. Allerdings freie Dienstleistungswirtschaft heißt nicht ungeregelte Dienstleistungswirtschaft, sondern eben sie muss geregelt werden, damit es einen fairen Wettbewerb und auch Fairness gegenüber den Verbrauchern und Verbraucherinnen gibt. Und deswegen denke ich, müssen wir sehr vorsichtig auch umgehen mit den Begriffen. Wir haben heute eine Diskussion gehabt, die sehr intensiv war. Sehr viele Informationen. Ich bedanke mich bei Ihnen allen und darf zum Abschluss meinem lieben Koordinator Nicola Danti das letzte Wort geben. Hier haben jetzt mal ausnahmsweise sehr viele Frauen reden dürfen. Deswegen darf jetzt auch ein Mann den Abschluss machen. Bitte schön, Nicola.
Beh, non è una conclusione, diciamo, è la rappresentanza di genere, la mia Grazie davvero. Io purtroppo non ho potuto essere presente, avevo un altro appuntamento, ma credo che sia stata una serata molto importante per tutti noi, per il nostro gruppo. Evelyn ha ben riassunto gli obiettivi e gli elementi che sono emersi nel dibattito. Credo che da un punto di vista politico per noi che abbiamo sempre sostenuto una difesa forte dei consumatori europei, c'è l'impegno massimo non solo di Evelyn ma di tutto il gruppo dei socialisti e democratici per far sì che questo provvedimento trovi nelle prossime settimane compimento, almeno a livello parlamentare. Poi ci sarà un successivo accordo con il Consiglio quando riusciremo a avere una posizione unica, però l'impegno massimo del nostro gruppo per portare a termine questo tema. Io penso che il tema della rivoluzione digitale è un tema che ci interroga su tutti i settori. Lo abbiamo visto nelle piattaforme di economia collaborativa di cui mi sono occupato io, lo abbiamo visto nei contratti di cui si è occupato Evelyn in un'altra occasione. Insomma, noi dobbiamo far sì che i consumatori siano oggi tutelati in tutti i settori, non solo nel commercio tradizionale, ma soprattutto in quello online. Come dire, la vulnerabilità di cui ho sentito parlare alla fine oggi è molto diversificata, perché si può essere vulnerabili di fronte al commercio online anche in situazioni diverse. C'è un gap di conoscenza, di informazione, di capacità tecnologica che per esempio può rendere vulnerabili molte persone che magari in un'altra condizione possono non esserlo. Quindi io penso che dobbiamo lavorare su questo, noi lo faremo attraverso gli emendamenti, attraverso un lavoro politico e di contenuto su questo testo e cercheremo di portare avanti le ragioni per cui riteniamo che i consumatori debbano avere il massimo di tutela su tutti i punti che sono stati messi in evidenza stasera. Grazie a chi è intervenuto, grazie a chi è stato presente e grazie a Evelyn che ha presieduto perfettamente questa meeting stasera. Grazie a voi.